All right. You all have probably heard the news. I feel like I probably don't have to tell you guys what's going on since you probably all know it's all over the news. But it looks like people across the political spectrum are banding together by buying GameStop stocks to make, hopefully, some hedge fund go bankrupt as revenge for the financial crash or just a stupid way to make money. I'm recording this on Friday, January 29th. So this may not be the most up-to-date by the time that you are listening to this. But what was so interesting about the events that are taking place the past couple of days and at the moment is not only the event itself, but also the coincidence of this interview that I recorded with Jay Smith. Jay Smith is one of the top earning traders of eToro. He's an active trader. And the reason that I interviewed him was because of his political views and his involvement in the cryptocurrency market. At first, I was a little bit hesitant to actually do the interview just because I think people on the left, we have a not so positive view, I think rightfully so, against people in the stock market, investors, Wall Street. But I had decided to record this interview anyways, and I recorded this a couple of weeks ago because I was interested in hearing his perspective and listening to how he synthesizes his own political views with how he makes money through investing and trading stocks and cryptocurrencies. At first, I was afraid because I feel for the most part, most people on the left have never really tried actively trading. Not that I'm advocating for people to do that, but I thought that it would be interesting to get that perspective in the form of this interview. Unfortunately, it took place well before these events ever started occurring, so I couldn't ask him directly about his thoughts on it. But I thought I would share some of mine. The first thing I want to say is that if you're surprised by this, then you haven't been paying attention. I'll admit that I've been an observer of the Wall Street Bets community for a while now, and I didn't join because I was interested in gambling my money on the stock markets in the same sense that they were. When I originally did join them, it was because I was doing the calculations in my head, and I knew that in the long term, I would not be able to afford all of the things that I needed to pay for, including rent, including food, including my student loan debt, and also be a sane person because shit just costs money. And so I was just interested in the possibility of investment as a way to liberate myself, it being one of the few ways under capitalism that you're able to do that. For very few professions can you work without investing any of that money and have enough money to retire at a reasonable age. I always had this thought that at some point Wall Street Bets was going to get on the news for something, but honestly, I thought it was more likely to happen because of a post that was racist or homophobic or something like that. I never thought that this stupid community of dirtbags would somehow inspire leftists to go on a campaign to make a hedge fund go bankrupt through the market. Time is going to tell whether or not it's successful. But it is a really crazy sight to see. The amount of vitriol and hatred towards Wall Street that a lot of the posters on Wall Street Bets have shown because of the actual material conditions in which they were forced under because of their greed during the Great Recession just shows how much people want a different system, even though they may have very peculiar and maybe even unhealthy ways of showing that anger and showing that desire. The second thing I want to say is this. If you're in on the fun at the moment because you believe that buying stocks in GameStop or AMC or Nokia or whatever else is some form of rebellion against Wall Street, then that means that buying cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, like Ethereum, or whatever else, is arguably also a form of rebellion against Wall Street. I don't say that to encourage you to go buy and invest in a cryptocurrency. I've said this before, but I could not care less what you do with your money. The point that I want to make is that if you're going to partake in the fun, then please keep in mind that what's going on is not some sort of revolution and is largely a battle between different segments of the bourgeoisie with some working class people sprinkled throughout. I'm not trying to ruin the fun or anything like that. I think you should enjoy it for as long as you possibly can because this is hilarious. But we got to be honest with ourselves having those type of thoughts. Not that I'm saying that anyone here is. I think in a later episode, I'll go into more detail about my thoughts around the whole thing and how this relates to the blockchain space and how we could potentially take advantage of what's happening at this moment. And I think this moment is really going to change things probably for a long time. But until then, I hope you guys enjoy this episode with Jay. And I think a lot of the answers that he gives are probably more interesting just considering the moment that we're living in. So hello again, you're listening to The Blockchain Socialist, and I have today Jay Smith, who's one of the top earning traders on eToro, which is a social trading platform where people can copy the trades of other traders and then they earn a little bit of money off of what they earn. So what's interesting about Jay is that while he's doing this, he's also openly left-wing, as he's a Green Party voter in the UK, a social democrat, a vegan, and owes a little bit of his success to trading cryptocurrencies, which started, I believe, around 2013. But hey, Jay, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, so you have a very interesting profile, obviously, and I think it turns quite a few heads. But maybe before we get into that, what we can start with is just your story. Maybe you can guide us through, what's your background? What was your career like? How did you get into trading, your politics? How does that unfold, and how did that get you into trading as your day job essentially?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird path. From the age of like 12, 13, I was super interested in politics. Not only politics, but everything that's most related to that. So economics, I was interested in, any sort of system. I was interested in the ideas of comparing state-run services with privately run services and all of these sorts of things at the age of like 13, which is pretty strange. I remember convincing my parents to pay for Sky TV in the UK, which is like a cable TV service, simply so that I could watch all of the investing channels like Bloomberg and CNBC. Pretty strange. I dropped out of school when I was 13 as well. I left school with zero qualifications. I kind of did my own thing. I got really into gaming and esports, really into like the tech world, was exploring futurism and futurology and, socialism and different forms of capitalism, pretty much everything, just trying to kind of figure out what my views were on everything. Pretty early on, I discovered that essentially, in my view, the world is unfair. The world is very unfair, and the best way to make money is to have money. So, from the age of like 16 or so, I started to save up, everything I had, and started trying to invest. That kind of evolved to where it is today. I was a professional gamer for a while, which did not pay well back when I was a professional gamer. I worked some pretty dead-end jobs because I had no qualifications. So I worked in a parcel delivery company, eventually managed to get a career in esports. All the time I was still investing everything that I was earning in whatever I thought was the best investment at the time, and eventually that enabled me to quit my job and invest full time on eToro.
Yeah, so then I guess what inspired you to get into trading was sort of the realization of, or at least the understanding of the different complexities within capitalism and sort of what is unfair about it, and realizing what that is and how you can insert yourself into, I guess, sort of that, into an advantageous position, so to say.
Yeah, essentially it was, the phrase that I always like to repeat, I don't know if other people have said it, but or if I invented it or coined it or whatever, but it's essentially the key word to look at in capitalism and in socialism is the word capital and the word social, because those are ultimately the driving forces behind each. Obviously there are perversions of both, and there is a middle ground somewhere, that's pretty hard to find, but without capital you just cannot really succeed in any major way in a capitalist society. You need capital, and that's what I realized early. I realized the power of compounding gains, and I knew that if I didn't do that, then the prospects for me getting onto the property ladder, or anything really substantial beyond the average life, was really pretty unlikely, based upon my upbringing and my background.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it's not like you had any sort of like bourgeois type of upbringing. I mean, it's sort of it's learning the things that you don't learn not having that type of background, that sort of, I think for a lot of other people who may have been growing up working class, like the internet, I think sort of was a pretty crucial role in being able to explore those type of interests. I would say, I mean, similar for me when I was younger as well, growing up working class, you sort of like, well, why is everything so unfair? And then you sort of go into these rabbit holes on Wikipedia or what have you back in the day, and try and figure it out and try to come up with answers to that.
Yeah, and that's essentially exactly what I did as well, right? I just Googled stuff and researched stuff, and as you say, the internet is a great tool for learning, and I feel like I learned a lot more teaching myself stuff from the internet than I did from school.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine if you leave school at 13, then internet's your best friend in a sense for education and experiences as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So then, what was it that really got you into eToro and like how what was that evolution like, making it as your full-time job as compared to your previous jobs before that?
Yeah, so at the time when I went full time for eToro, I was working for a gaming company in the UK. It got bought out by a company that's essentially the UK equivalent of GameStop, a company called Game, and
It's a company called Game.
yeah, it's a company called Game. Yeah, that's literally their
Okay.
name. And yeah, so they bought out the company that I was working for, which was basically like a gaming events company. We used to run like esports events and launch events for new game titles and stuff like that. And that was a fun job, and I learned a lot from it, a lot about business and stuff like that. Previous to that, I'd only really done the really kind of pretty boring, dull jobs of, parcel delivery and things like that, working in warehouses, working in logistics. So I didn't have loads of experience in the working world until I kind of started working there. But as I said, I always had this kind of attitude that I need to save money as quickly as possible to enable the compounding effect to work, right? For me to slowly try and get to a point where I can kind of move out of the working class tier or the middle class tier into the upper class tier, and then hopefully cause a bit of disruption. So yeah, when I was at that company, I had been trading on the side on eToro for about 4 years at that point, minding my own business, just doing my own trades on the stock market, and it turned out that they had been trying to call my parents for several weeks, trying to get hold of me, phoning my old address, and with little luck. And when they eventually got through to me, they said, would really like you to become a popular investor on eToro because your trading results are really good, and you have good risk management, so we think that you would be well suited to being a popular investor. I had no idea what a popular investor was. I asked them if I had to pay anything. They said that actually they pay me. And that was it, really. I kind of grasped that opportunity, and it turned into what it is now, which is me managing somewhere in the region of $100 million now, on behalf of 33,000 other people, which
Yeah.
is a pretty wild journey.
Yeah. And so I know with eToro, it's sort of just like a social network of traders, essentially. Uh, does that mean when they called you, they just saw you as just like a very good investor looking at your stats in comparison to everyone else, and then they sort of lifted you into like the social sphere so that others could copy you? Or were you sort of building a brand for yourself even before then?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really doing anything to build any sort of brand for myself. There were a few like friends and family that had kind of seen my success and decided to copy me because, they allow a few people to copy you even before you, kind of get accepted into the popular investor program. But really, it was a case of them kind of spotting my talent, I guess, and kind of lifting me up and putting me front and center. And obviously, this actually coincided. So this was in like early 2017 that this happened, and obviously that coincided very well with when cryptocurrencies and especially altcoins started to boom. eToro was one of the first trading platforms to add Bitcoin. They added Bitcoin in 2013, so a long time ago.
Very early, yeah.
And yeah, exactly, very early. And the CEO's got a lot of history with cryptocurrencies and stuff as well. Vitalik Buterin actually used to work for the CEO of eToro for a while in their offices, which is pretty cool. So yeah, everything kind of happened at the right time. I was producing a lot of content on eToro after I became a popular investor. I started to write posts about, Bitcoin and Ethereum and, the forks that were going on with Bitcoin Cash and all of these different things, and how it worked and why it had value. And at the time, I was basically the authority on that subject on eToro. So my following grew as a result of that. And yeah, they basically stuck with me.
So you say you dropped out of school when you were pretty young, and you didn't have any sort of traditional finance education. I mean, in the traditional finance world, because you were investing in stocks as well, and then of course in cryptocurrencies, I think it's I mean, nobody has education on that unless they actually do trading on it. But how did you learn the tricks of the trade, and why do you think you became popular? I mean, I guess besides the fact you were probably one of the first people trading cryptocurrencies so openly.
Yeah, one of the things that I've always really believed in is transparency. I believe that there is a lot of, I guess, what you could call fake news out there, or something similar regarding trading. There's all these courses online that teach you how to trade, and people telling you should be day trading, or you should be doing this, or you should be doing that, and it's all complete rubbish, really. Most investors don't buy and sell things in the same day or in short time periods. Most investors really don't care about looking at charts even that much. They're looking at the underlying fundamentals of the company, and it's pretty simple, really. You look at how much debt they've got and how much cash they've got, and you look at the industry they're in, and if you think they're going to grow, and you make your decisions based on that. For me, the way that I invest has always been based around disruption. I've always been an early adopter of everything. I had the first Google Android phone I had. But before that, I was using, I had the first Microsoft phone when that came out, in PC gaming and esports. I was obviously in that very early. I like to think that I became a vegan just before it kind of became mainstream, which is becoming now, I think. And the same with Bitcoin, right? I found it really, really early just because those are the things that I'm always looking for. I'm always looking for what is the next like step in technology and in what's going on, and that's always kind of been my ethos within investing. And then I'm transparent about it. I tell people that, like, I'm investing in these things because I think that it is the future. And it doesn't matter if you think that wind energy is too expensive now, because in 5 years' time, it'll be irrelevant how expensive it is. They'll be building them anyway, right? Because we need to fix the problem of climate change. And that's one of the easier ways we have of doing it. And I look at hydrogen now, and it's a similar story. Hydrogen is essentially what's going to become the battery for the grid. I'm pretty convinced, because we need to store energy somewhere. The sun isn't always shining, wind isn't always blowing, and hydrogen seems like the best solution. And these are just kind of thought experiments that go on in my head, like what comes next after that, what comes next after the next thing, and ultimately that, I think, is part of why I lean socialist as well, is that when I look at the long-term kind of outlook for the world and how capitalism would evolve, especially if uncontrolled, I find it to be pretty dangerous and massively unequal and unfair, especially as things like automation happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that leads perfectly to my next question, which is how do you synthesize, what you're doing with your politics? I mean, it seems like your politics influences a bit, at least, about what your trades in terms of identifying problems that the world is going to face. But how do you go about synthesizing being a trader, which is sort of like arguably one of the like main levers that capitalism sort of propagates itself, while also being a critic of capitalism?
Yeah, I mean, the analogy I like to use really is like if you're at a board game night and all of your friends want to play the game Monopoly and you want to play Scrabble. And what ends up happening is they start playing Monopoly. And, you could sit there and say, I'm not going to participate in Monopoly, but then all you're really doing is ensuring that you have a bad time for the next 4 hours or however long it takes them to play Monopoly. And then maybe afterwards you can convince them to play Scrabble. Whereas I think if you participate in that game and you study that game and you learn the rules of that game and you figure out how to win that game, which by the way you can do. There's actually a book about how to win at Monopoly, and there's a lot of maths involved and stuff. But but if you do that and then you demolish everyone, they're not going to want to play Monopoly anymore. And perhaps they might go with the game that you suggest next. And that's kind of my feeling on capitalism generally, right? Is that I don't have a choice, right? I'm born into the system, so I have to participate to some extent. I do my very best to try and remain as ethical as I can. I'm pretty strict on what kind of companies I will trade, and also, will take decisions to stop trading a company if I feel like they're treating their staff poorly or they're damaging the environment, or if there's corruption or human rights abuse or anything like that, then I try and jump out of companies. But obviously, it's a grey area, right? It's not an easy thing to do with any sort of consistent rule. But that's the way that I approach it, and I think it's worked pretty well so far.
Yeah, I think it's a funny analogy because from what I've read, is that Monopoly was originally created as a game to critique capitalism.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, so that is pretty funny. It is a very unenjoyable game, at least for me.
Yeah, I mean it's a
So
pretty boring
long.
game as well, especially if you get like knocked out early. You just gotta wait 4 hours for your friends to stop playing. But
Yeah. Bryce, what would you say to people that may say that, we've been playing Monopoly for a really long time, and a lot of people have been screwed for a very long time. Like, when is it time to switch to Scrabble, so to say?
yeah, that's the difficult thing, I
Scrabble is
think.
socialist now, I think.
Yeah. Scrabble is, I guess, what we're defining as socialist. So I think realistically, part of the problem is greed. At the end of the day, I'm sure that there are plenty of people like me who have gone the same path as me in the past and reached a certain point, decided they actually quite like money, and have kind of changed their political views. And that's easily done when you're hanging around with a lot of people that are investing, and you kind of learn that language and stuff. And it, you find it easier and easier to try and justify things like water markets, right? So water has got a price, right? And that's kind of insane in some respects, because without it people die.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. It's difficult to kind of come to terms with those things. In terms of when it's going to end, it's hard to say, but I do think that there are a lot of things kind of in our favor that are coming, right, that are inevitable. And I think the first of those things that's really going to hit hard is automation. When automation comes, we're going to see companies' profits continue to expand at a time when the amount of money people have to spend is shrinking because of unemployment or very low wages, especially as population growth continues as well. And obviously, there are some people who say, people said this before with the Industrial Revolution and things like that we'd all lose our jobs and then everything would be disastrous. But I do think that when you really kind of sit back and look at just how much stuff is being automated, it becomes pretty clear that at some point in the future, there's not going to be very many jobs to go around. And And so that in itself kind of builds this need for something else, right? Because capitalism doesn't work if people aren't spending money, and people aren't going to spend money unless they have it. So perhaps that may end up with, something like UBI coming in, universal basic income, or perhaps it will lead to something else, and more level playing fields or more regulation on companies and stuff. Regardless of which way it unfolds, it's helping transition the world towards something that looks a lot more like socialism.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this episode so far, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share with a friend, and join the crypto leftist communities on Discord and Reddit, which you can find links to in the show notes. If you want to be sure that more content like this can be created, you can donate to my efforts through Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/theblockchainsocialist, you can donate starting at $3 a month and help me out and join the newest patrons like Jordan from Canada, who is my first patron from Canada, so that's pretty exciting. At the moment, I've spent more on this project than I've ever earned from it due to all the hosting costs, so any amount really helps. As a patron, you'll get a shout out on an episode like I just did, and access to monthly Patreon exclusive Q&A episodes where you can submit questions you'd like me to answer, and I'll give my thoughts in roughly 20 minutes. On the latest Patreon exclusive Q&A episodes, I gave my thoughts on the Stable Act and what the crypto leftists' approach should be with that proposed legislation. Of course, I'll be making free content like this interview to help spread the message that blockchain does not need to be used to further entrench capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it. So if that message resonates with you, I hope you'll consider helping out. As you can maybe tell, the microphone that I'm using for this recording is giving a better audio quality than what is actually in the interview, and that's because I recently bought a new microphone thanks to the donations given by patrons. So thank you guys for your support, and here's the rest of the interview. So let's now move a little bit more towards the cryptocurrency side, because I'm interested, having this perspective. What was it that interested you in cryptocurrencies? I mean, maybe in particular from a critical of capitalism sort of standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things, right? Like the first thing that comes to mind really is the kind of the anarchist argument for it, right? The idea that when you look at various countries around the world and the way trade deals work and the way that potentially you can have tariffs and things like that kind of pushed onto nations for not kind of towing the line with whoever is in charge. Bitcoin's kind of appealing in that sense, right? Like I could theoretically, if I wanted to, I could just send money to Venezuela and nobody can stop me with Bitcoin, whereas I can't do that through the financial system. So that's one thing that's kind of appealing for it. Obviously, it has downsides as well. I think the thing I like most about it, though, is the fact that it is like the internet. It's this technology that is entirely open and it isn't owned by anyone. And just like the internet, it is a battleground where there is a fight for control, and we could end up with a system where AOL takes over the internet and we all browse the web through AOL's browser and we only see things that AOL like, or we could end up with an internet where actually we're all using RSS feeds and we're all using these open protocols that let us see and do whatever we want, and it's a lot more free. And I just think that with, it's inevitable that Bitcoin is going to continue to kind of absorb a lot of the financial system simply because of the way it's designed to compete with other assets in terms of value. And so, again, like the monopoly analogy, I feel like you need to be there, right? We need to be involved and we need to be trying to help shape it in a way that we think is good for society. And I think probably the most powerful thing about Bitcoin is actually its transparency. You can see which addresses have got the most money and you can see where they're sending it. Maybe you can't see who owns those addresses, but there is potential there for something.
But we can find them, and we can.
Exactly. We can find them.
Meet them to my friend, Introduce them to my friend, Mr. Guillotine.
Exactly right. So that there is potential to create this system of actually, no, we can see what you're doing with your money, and we as society don't like it. And you can actually even see these battles playing out all the time in cryptocurrency. That's what all of the forks are. Every time there is a fork, it's because there is a big disagreement on essentially the ideology of the project. And there have been forks that have removed some of the biggest addresses. There have been forks that have removed Satoshi's coins. There have been forks that have changed the rules on mining or changed it to staking or all of these other systems to try and make it fairer in different people's views. And I'm hoping that perhaps we can convince people to go with a fork that looks better for everyone at some point.
Yeah. So it seems to me that at least to your first point, one of the things that interested you about cryptocurrency was its anti-imperial sort of aspects of it. I mean, I know that countries like Venezuela, Iran, have been trading with each other through Bitcoin, allegedly, I guess. And I know Venezuela is trying to set up a crypto mining farm. And this is all in response to economic sanctions that are imposed to them by big powers like the US and the West.
Yeah, and that's ultimately part of the control, right? And again, part of the battlefield. It's not necessarily to say that one side is right and one side is wrong. I mean, China is also making all sorts of strange moves within cryptocurrency, and maybe North Korea is, and there's obviously potential for people to misuse this technology the same way that people misuse the internet. But if we can make it transparent, at least we'll know what's going on and know potentially the real agendas behind stuff.
So are there any thoughts that you have, because you were in Bitcoin fairly early, or you were involved in trading with it? What were your thoughts on the evolution of Bitcoin and how it looks today? Of course, there's been a lot of different forks and a lot of different battles and a lot of different figures within the space that have come and gone with varying degrees of insanity, I think. So, I mean, how do you see that evolution? Like, has it been for the better, the worse? Are there other crypto projects that you actually are more interested in than Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I think talking about Bitcoin first, I think it's gone down a relatively balanced path, right? Bitcoin is good because it enables anyone really to buy it. It can be more difficult depending on where you are in the world, but at the end of the day, the attempts to try and ban it or kind of discredit it really at this point have not worked, and it's pretty obvious that at this point the genie's out of the bottle, and there's really no acceptable political way of stopping Bitcoin from continuing, and that's good because financial freedom, as much as that's something that is often said by kind of libertarians and stuff, is a real thing, and enabling people to get out of their predicament by putting a little bit in Bitcoin, even if it's the smallest amount, is going to help them, and that's good and that's empowering. There's also, of course, the good news in how it's been kind of disruptive to finance as well, right? I do think that the reason we're seeing products like TransferWise and Cash App and things like that growing is partially as a response to Bitcoin, right? There is this kind of notion that actually Western Union charging you $200 to send $1,000 from Canada to Nigeria is pretty unacceptable. Like paying a 20% fee or something is pretty outrageous. And Bitcoin is holding those companies to account and actually leveling the playing field a bit, and helping give access to finance to people that really didn't have it before. So that's all the good stuff. There is obviously bad stuff as well, right? Bitcoin encourages hoarding. Bitcoin is, potentially good for tax avoidance and tax evasion. So those things are not great. And I'm not sure if there's really a good solution to it yet, but there's a lot of interesting stuff going on within cryptocurrency. I've seen projects in the really early days that had time limits on your funds. I thought that was a really cool and interesting concept. If you don't spend it, you lose it. A good way of kind of keeping control and automatically taking stuff out. I've seen projects that have really high inflation rates, which again is essentially a tax on people with the most money, and actually realistically one of the fairest forms of taxation.
So you're not supportive of the pro-deflationary sort of politics of a lot of Bitcoiners, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not really. I actually think inflation can be a really good tool for leveling the playing field. obviously uncontrolled inflation is bad, right? I think we've seen enough experiments in that to see that, but we've also seen that deflation, uncontrolled deflation, can be bad as well, and potentially we'll see that in the future with Bitcoin. I'm not sure. It's a weird situation, right? Because it's competing with real currencies, and by being more deflationary, it's a better store of value and a better kind of investment. Perhaps if it didn't have that, we wouldn't see it succeeding so much. But who knows? I think there's still a lot of room for experimentation in the different kind of levers that you can pull economically on Bitcoin to try and make it something that's fairer for everyone.
So I imagine in your experience in being involved in these types of spaces where there are a lot of investors and there are a lot of traders and there are a lot of crypto libertarians, I imagine that you must be in contact or in conflict with these people in terms of your politics and like how you see the world, and just having conversations about maybe more abstract things. How do you communicate with these type of people? What is it like for you having such a different worldview but being so close to these type of people?
It's interesting. I mean, there's two types of people, right? There's the type that will argue with you continually and will not give any ground and will not kind of even acknowledge your viewpoint. And most of those people are probably blocked on my Twitter feed now, because there's no winning with them. But there are equally some people that are very opposed to my view that can kind of relate to what I'm saying, and at the very least have respect for the fact that I'm doing well in their world. I'm doing well in their game.
You're investing pretty well for a Marxist.
Exactly. And so perhaps through doing that, I've converted a few people. I mean, I know that I've converted a few people, but it's weird trying to be accepted in that world, and trying to accept others in that world for me as well is also pretty difficult. But I think the thing that kind of gives me at least some hope is that most people that I speak to, regardless, still believe that they are doing the thing that is best for everyone. And I guess that's like the smallest kind of glimmer of hope that you can hold on to, right? Is that ultimately I don't think that everyone that's a libertarian or everyone that's a proper like classical neoliberalist or whatever it is, I don't think they're bad people, right? They just perhaps haven't really seen themselves firsthand what it's like to be at the other end of the system that they're kind of vouching for.
I imagine that Jeff Bezos may think that he's doing what's best for the world, but I guess at a certain point you gotta slap him with reality.
Yeah, exactly right. So like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are good examples, right? I mean, like there's no denying, right, that both of them have made really good contributions to the world, right? Like Amazon has changed logistics and changed like the availability of products for people. That's a good thing. Elon Musk has brought in this era of electric vehicles. That's a great thing. They've also done some pretty bad things.
Yeah.
And I don't hold positions in either of their companies for that reason. I think that the power has gone to their heads. They've gone completely insane to some level, and I just don't think that it's really something that I want my funds or the funds of the people that are copying me supporting. So yeah, it's difficult, but again, I think that's just what happens with greed, right? And with power, it corrupts.
So based on your experience, I'd be really interested to hear what, if any, are there any learnings you think for the political left that you could share based on your experiences of dealing with these investors? And is there some sort of insights you think into their world that would be beneficial for the left to hear about? Or is maybe it's just obvious what it is, but
I mean, I think actually this kind of relates to a book that I think perhaps people should read called Humankind by Rutger Bregman, I think his name is. And that book actually basically tackles what is the core of this issue, and what ultimately I think is the difference between, at its very core, the difference between people who lean socialist and people who lean capitalist, right? Is that capitalists believe that inherently humans are greedy and bad, and that humans will try and do bad things and try and take as much as they can. And as a result, they kind of join that ideology. They think, well, everyone else is buying nice big houses because and saving all this money to give to their children, because if we don't do it, then our children are going to be poor and lead a terrible life, right? So I need to get as much money as I can and as much stuff as I can to make my life better, because nobody's going to do it for me. Whereas the opposite in reality is true. Most people, when they see someone that doesn't have any money, will give them something. When they see someone that's struggling, they'll help them, regardless of what it is. And that I think is where socialists lie. So I think it's about realizing that actually most people really believe in capitalism because it's the only thing that they know, and because they've been taught it. And you've got to kind of unteach that. They're not bad people. They're people that perhaps just don't understand that really, this narrative is being pushed out by a very small group of people, and it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it doesn't need to be that way. We could build something that is fairer and more equitable society for everyone.
No, so you think it comes out of just sort of like maybe an unconscious understanding that the system is broken. However, you need to double down into that system if you want to survive, I guess. I mean,
yeah, exactly. That's what
yeah.
I think it is. Yeah, I think that's what they believe in survival of the fittest. That's really what it comes down to.
It's already public knowledge, I guess, that you make a fair amount of money, and so you're in this sort of, I imagine, strange position where your actual class interest would probably be to be a conservative of sorts, but you're a bit of a class traitor in that sense, at least in terms of your politics. Have you learned anything in terms of the advantages or limitations that there are in having so much money, and what you're able to do in terms of creating change for the world you want to see?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly been a really weird journey, because, as you say, I have definitely ascended the classes. 5 years ago, I was on something close to minimum wage. 10 years ago, I was on a 0-hour contract on minimum wage. So I was really basically entirely beholden to a company saying I've got work that day or I don't, and that was it for almost nothing. And obviously now I'm not in that position at all. I'm in the polar opposite. And it used to be my opinion that it would be really easy when you have that kind of money to make noticeable change. But it's more difficult than I thought it was, simply because when you start dealing with the kind of money that I'm now dealing with, even in terms on like behalf of my copiers, you realize just how small it is compared to the real 1% of the world, and just how much you're still fighting the tide even at that point. One of the things that I think is helping is the ability for me to invest in startups, and invest in startups that are actually really doing innovative things that are actually going to help people. I've invested in startups totally outside of eToro. This is that are doing things like redesigning concrete, right, or redesigning insulation for buildings and building it out of something different, and essentially growing it out of mushrooms, and totally fair systems. I've invested in a company that builds wind turbines and then lets people buy shares in the wind turbine, and they get all of the power that comes out of that wind turbine, a cooperative structure. Those are the things that I think are kind of the most exciting, because I'm helping these companies, and I don't really care if I get a return or not. If I do, then it's good, because it means that I can hopefully invest in more projects like that, and help them grow further. But if I don't, then it doesn't feel too bad either. I still feel like I've done something to contribute and help people, right? To help people get cheaper power if they use that service, or to help green up the world just a little bit more. It's so difficult to really do anything much more than that. I mean, politics is something that I've always been really interested in. I'm an active member of the Green Party in the UK, and I go to their conferences and stuff. And I've been flip flopping on the idea of donating a lot of money to them to try and help them. But it's difficult to kind of justify if that's going to yield a better return for most people in the world than investing that money in startups, or just giving that money away to people I see on the street, or investing it in universal basic income charities, or whatever it is. So it's kind of an ongoing learning experience. And I think really the last year or so is when I've most started to kind of think about the best way of trying to redeploy some of what I've made to help other people and to help usher in that kind of change that I want to see in society. Yeah, it's difficult. I think really the best thing to come out of my success is actually the fact that I've managed to onboard other people into the idea of investing and helping themselves in that way. The more people that we can kind of get investing and keep them sane and keep them from succumbing to that kind of greed and that survival of the fittest attitude, and realizing that, hey, you've managed to get out of this situation, but that doesn't mean that things are okay for everyone else, and we still have a responsibility to pay our taxes and to try and improve stuff. So I think really that's the best thing to come from it, is that I've opened a lot of people's eyes, a lot of people who would never normally get into investing, people that were working with me on the floor of warehouses, into the ability for them to actually transition those tiers and start to help me usher in that change.
No, I mean, it sounds like it's not enough just to have a lot of money if you want to make change. It's being sort of conscious and making good decisions in terms of allocating those resources to create those changes. And it's not an easy thing to identify, of course.
Yeah, because realistically, the battle that we've got isn't in redistributing the wealth, because we can do that and then the wealth will redistribute itself again back to the way it was. The difficulty is in changing people's minds. And that really is actually what you're kind of trying to invest in. It's investing in convincing people that actually, there's a different way.
Yeah, and in effect, I assume changing institutions as well, hopefully, that institutions within capitalism are we just sort of realize we don't need them.
Yeah.
So I once sent out a poll tweet asking whether it was a good idea or a bad idea to start a hedge fund that gives its earnings to support strike funds. What do you think? Good idea or bad idea?
It depends really on, I mean, realistically, it depends on the strike that's involved. To some extent, I think it would actually be better to just go down the avenue of impact investing, right? If you get a hedge fund big enough, then you can just buy out most of Amazon and tell them to pay their staff correctly. Or literally, if you've got a majority on the board of a company, you can literally say, actually, we're now a cooperative. Here you go. Now everyone has some shares in the company, or whatever it may be. I feel like that's actually a better way of doing it, personally.
So it's like basically a cooperative hedge fund.
My style of investing is all about thinking about the future, and I do think that it's worth saying again that like the current system we live on, like if you extrapolate that out into the future, just looks terrible for everyone. Unless we reach some form of post-scarcity society where we can just 3D print any object that we want on Earth, capitalism won't work, because ultimately we're always going to be limited by the resources we have. That could be water, it could be land, it could be human resources in terms of people actually working. It could be all sorts of different things. But as long as we have those limitations, we have to find a way of sharing it in some sort of way that gives people a basic good standard of living.
Yeah. So maybe actually one question that popped up in my head is, this is related to an idea from the EXA group, the Economic Space Agency. And they have this idea about shorting capitalism. And I was curious what you thought about that. Like, what if you are maybe if you're an investor, is there? I mean, it's a very silly thought experiment, of course. Like, could you short capitalism on the stock market today?
To short actual like capitalism as a whole, I don't think so. You could maybe do things
You
like
can't.
short entire sectors, and you could usher out sectors that are bad. And actually, there are some examples of that in the past. There was a company that used to do a lot of animal testing in the UK that basically got demolished by all of the activists slowly buying up shares of it and and essentially disassembling the company from within it. I can't remember the name of the company off the top of my head. So things like that are possible. But for the whole system, I think it's too much. I'm not sure if it's really doable.
So we can't invest. We can't just invest in socialism. It's not. You don't think we
No, not yet. We need to like make a.
socialism mutual fund.
Yeah, I mean this is part of the problem, right? The issue that we have is the way game theory kind of works is that, certain socialism on paper is the best thing, right? For society, it means the most prosperous kind of lifestyle for everyone overall. In theory, if you just divide resources equally and like in its most purest kind of form. But obviously, when you compare that with capitalism, it just doesn't work in terms of self-interest. So I don't think there's really any way of investing directly in socialism. And I think the problem lies really in game theory, in that socialism, when you put it face to face against capitalism on its own, doesn't beat it in terms of self-interest. So people, if they have to choose between those two camps, would always choose choose capitalism, unfortunately, for the most part, unless we can kind of change the way people think about it. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something that we can put in the middle first that does beat capitalism that we can then beat with socialism. And again, I've kind of alluded to this a lot, but that's the way I think things are going. I think we're heading towards a world probably of universal basic income, which still means we live in capitalism, probably of state-controlled things like broadband and internet and water and things like that, real essential limited resources. And then after we've got to that point, transitioning from that away from the rest of capitalism should be a bit easier. But it's probably going to be a pretty long journey.
It's also difficult to know what's going to come up between all those things happening as well.
Yeah. I mean, part of the battle, right, is figuring out what's the next stage in technology as well. Because I don't think anyone really predicted Bitcoin coming.
So yeah, that was a super interesting talk. Maybe to top it off, maybe we can hear your plugs. Where can people keep up with you? Where can they learn more about what you do?
So you can follow me on Twitter. My name's Jaynemesis. Actually, my name's Jaynemesis pretty much everywhere, except Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. If you see anything on Facebook, it's a really obvious scam. Don't give them any money. Obviously, eToro.com is where I do my trading and investing. If you're from America, unfortunately, you can't copy me, but people from other regions of the world can. So, feel free to jump on there and copy me or copy someone else. There's actually a lot of ethical investors on there and stuff as well. So yeah, there's a lot of good selection on there.
All right, cool. Well, thanks a lot, Jay. And yeah, I'm sure we'll talk again another time.
Thanks for having me. It was a good chat.